Hold on. Oh, wait, there it is. Okay. Didn't say it was live, and now we're live anyway. Welcome back to another episode of Dynasty Theory on this Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully everybody gets to enjoy some time with their family and friends. Meanwhile, I'm stuck here with these two. What's going on, Dan?
Come on, you should be more excited than that, JB. You know, all that pre-show energy, and, you know, Mitch is back in town here, feeling good, back to 100%, ready to perform. Rangers hockey later. Let's go, man. Let's talk. But I won't talk hockey today. I promise. We'll stay.
Yeah, we don't want to hear that. I was up late last night. I was telling Dan before the show, I was in the sheets. I was up bright and early this morning in the sheets.
Hey.
Somebody else was in different sheets up until about 5 minutes ago. What's up, Mitch?
Yeah,
Sleepy?
My wife just woke me up. She was like, "Hey, you have a podcast?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." But I am also going to care about hockey in about, I don't even know when it starts, in 6 months, since Utah has a team now. So I will be a hockey aficionado or something like that. I don't know what they call themselves, but I will care about hockey next year.
How far is the arena going to be from you?
Oh, 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. So
no, it's super close. Yeah, it's not bad.
All right. Well, that's enough about hockey. Nobody cares about that. Whenever you guys start talking about hockey in the Discord, I'm like, mute. All right. So because last week's episode was fairly well received, we did a similar concept this week, and I'm hoping we can get through everybody today. Last week, Dan and I, we ran through guys that really could be league winners. They could be guys that really overachieve in the 2024 season. It took about an hour and 6 minutes, and that was just with two of us on the show. So I'm hoping we can get out of here, before Labor Day. That's how long I think this episode's going to be. But I opened it up to the patrons again, and I said, hey, guys, give me a list of potential busts in the 24 season. So you can look at it from a redraft perspective, a dynasty perspective, either way, because the redraft mentality and the short-term outcomes, it does have a role and an impact on the dynasty value. So we're going to be going through. We have about 12 names here, and several of them were brought up more than once, so we'll point that out. But several names here that were brought up by our patrons that we're going to go through. I set the thresholds again like I did last week, so we have more context, not just, oh, yeah, that guy's going to be a bust. And then we're going to go through. Dan and Mitch are going to let us know on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely it is that they don't hit that threshold, as a result being a bust in the 2024 season. Are we ready to go?
Ready?
All right. Well, Mitch, wake up, because you're up first here. So Jordan Love, he was mentioned twice. He had a fantastic 2023 season. So the threshold I set outside, and listen, I had to drop this low because he was quarterback 7 last year at 21.2 points per game and +6, -4 scoring. I had to drop it low because if he finishes at like 18, 19 points per game, his value is still going to be rather insulated. Like, yeah, it's not going to be that quarterback 7, but let's say he's quarterback 16 or 18 and he's 3 points per game lower. I wouldn't say that's a bust from a value perspective. So I went down to outside the top 24. So Mitch, and that's 15.9 points per game last year. So Mitch, Jordan Love will not be a top 24 quarterback in 2024. How likely is that on a scale of 1 to 10?
So let me say, all the players on the sheets are very good. And so we could easily come in here and just throw out a 1 for all of these guys, but I just don't think it'll be all that helpful. I'm going to give Jordan Love a 4, just because we know how they started the season last year and how his touchdown rate was extremely high. That passing game was so efficient. And I do think it's just a good offense, right? I do think Jordan Love is probably very easily a top 15 quarterback. But there's guys who slide down every single year, and Jordan Love could be that guy. We love his pass catchers, but we kind of love all of them. I don't know if anyone really likes a single one, and if they do, they're probably just doing it for clicks on Twitter more than anything, right? But like, I love Christian Watson. If I could have Christian Watson on a lot of my teams, I would. But It's because his value is so low because he's been injured. And it's the same with all the rest of those guys. Now you have Josh Jacobs coming in, and he's never been in this offense before, and he already has hamstring issues. I think there's a lot of things that could lead to someone being like, hey, I could be out on Jordan Love this year, and it's not going to hurt me because he's probably not going to be an elite top 8 quarterback this year.
And that's the thing, too. You talk about the receiving core collectively from top to bottom. I think it's one of the strongest across the league, not from a high end perspective, but from like a top 4 or 5. That's a strong top 4 or 5 to have. And the issue and concern is going to be how interchangeable they are, how many spike weeks, floor weeks they're going to have. But we're not necessarily here to talk about their pass catchers, not right now, at least. So, Dan, Jordan Love, this was brought up twice whenever we looked for players to be mentioned. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I probably went in last week's show with Mitch's mindset of, hey, I want to throw out 1s and 10s, trying to find that helpful piece. So I like where he's coming from with that stance. But when I look at this quarterback landscape and I tried to not go down that road, I just couldn't do it, Mitch. Like, I am totally giving Jordan Love a 1 here for this reason. When I go down like 12 to 24 in my rankings, I could pick something apart more of those running backs. Even though there are some talented guys, like you're saying, don't disagree with that. Whether it be age, whether it be health, whether it be, changes in systems, there's so much continuity and talent here in Green Bay that I do not see a path, barring we could all say anybody could get injured this year, but he's not an injury-prone quarterback. His first year of play, he just shined, man. I watched him the last few weeks of the season put up some really high-scoring games. Then he rips apart my Cowboys in the playoffs. He's got all the weapons he needs at wide receiver, tight end, and running back. Him and Coach LaFleur got another year together. JB, I got to give it a 1, man, and just say I'm all in Jordan Love. Top 12, I can make the case for out of the top 12 because of that talent Mitch has, but not out of the top 24.
Yeah, and again, I had to go super low here because, like I said, if he finishes 3 points below last year, like, you're not really going to be talking about Jordan Love as a bust. So this is one of the more extreme examples, I think. But we have Mitch with a 4, Dan with a 1, thinking it's not all that likely. I think the biggest thing with Jordan Love is the efficiency we saw last year, the high touchdown rate, especially for some of the receivers. And can he sustain that efficiency? Because the volume wasn't necessarily there at times. And we know how, as a Dynasty community, it's like we almost would rather, I say we collectively as the Dynasty community, would rather a player be less efficient but have more volume. Because then it's like, okay, the efficiency could improve even if the volume drops. But now with Jordan Love, it's like, can he sustain that? I align more with Dan. I think a bust season would be fairly surprising here. But like Mitch said, I could say that exact line about 95% of the guys we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make for a boring as hell show.
And before we segue, and I know we're not talking about this today, but if I could just maybe plant a seed for a future episode, I'm really intrigued from Dynasty about that Green Bay receiving core. Like, you have Watson, which I think is a buy low, gonna bounce back. Romeo Doubs in the postseason and late in the year, he was a guy I was like writing off in DFS, and boy, he just kept standing out in those games. Jaden Reed, I think I like the most out of all of them. And then Dontavian Wicks is like the super sleeper that looked good. And Bo Melton's not even terrible. And then you have the tight end position with Musgrave and Kraft. Like, there are some intriguing weapons in Green Bay. So I just wanted to plant that seed.
I'm just thinking like if you're at work and you have a list of employees and people are going through the like Dan just did, and they get to your name and they go, and Dan Lamagna, he's not even terrible. Like, that is just such an endorsement. I was like, well, I feel like I should look for a new job if that's the way you're describing me. But anyway, like we typically do here at Dynasty Theory, spending a lot of time on the first guy. And we're going to do another quarterback, Dan. And this one, it kind of makes sense to start with Dan, the Cowboys fan. Jalen Hurts, quarterback 2 overall last year, 23.4 points per game in +6, -4 scoring. Is he going to finish outside of the top 12 quarterbacks in 2024? That would have been 19.5 points per game.
This is one of the most interesting ones on these show notes. And you wouldn't think so because, like, it's that big splash superstar name of the whole list. And you almost think it's easy. And I can make a case either way. And I like how you did this outside the top 12, JB. And I partially feel like I'm hedging my bets and I'm giving it a 5. I don't think he will finish outside the top 12. My money, he is in my, top 12 of top 10, even of rankings. But there were times last year where you watch these games and over the course of a couple years, when things don't go good in Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts kind of looks meh. But then when things are going really good, and he's got A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith and now a Saquon Barkley in the backfield, that's really enticing. But what I worried is, as we dig through dynasty rosters and deep drafts and free agent pickups, it was only like a week or two ago where, like, I had Devontae Parker at the bottom of a couple of my rosters. I'm like, I just got to get rid of him. He's an Eagle. He's probably washed. But the more I looked at it, I was like, he's their number 3 receiver, and it's not even close. And then he retires. And then now I'm thinking, man, they're like one A.J. Brown or DeVonta Smith away from not really having a lot of weapons. They bring in a new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore. So now you're going through changes, and you take the John Madden playing Kellen Moore, who I've got mixed feelings about from his days in Dallas. There are some things Kellen Moore does well, and there are some things that when, again, you want to win football games, they can be very frustrating with Kellen Moore. He had his great successes in Dallas, but then he had his moments that weren't good. So I give Hurts,
and you had those
5.
moments for the Chargers as well last year.
Yeah, we were waiting for the big Justin Herbert, breakout, and it never really came as they had some struggles. So to me, I think Kellen Moore's, although a smart coach, I think he's an overrated offensive coordinator. So I'll give it a 5. I think he'll finish in the top 12, but I do see a path where things could get a little scary.
Mitch?
Going with a 7 on this one.
Ooh.
Hot takes. Here we go. Is
it? Well, let's hear why.
I don't think it's hot. So, look, I don't think Kellen Moore's a good offensive coordinator. I just don't. I think he's proven over the last 3 years. At best, he's mediocre, and more than likely, he's worse than that. And then, so if you look at how Jalen Hurts scores his fantasy points, it's all through the rushing touchdowns. Not having Kelce is going to affect their brotherly shove a lot. I mean, if you act like, oh, no, it's really the guard that helps, that it's not the center, I think you're out of your mind because the center's the one who's starting that whole thing. I mean, we've seen how many times Kelce got them an extra half yard, whatever, just by getting up, moving the ball really quick, and the official don't see anything, right? And so if you look at Hurts, he had 15 rushing touchdowns last year, 13 rushing touchdowns in 22. Then you look at his passing stats, and like, I think we all want to love him as a passer. 22 passing touchdowns, 23 passing touchdowns. And then he did score that 21 points PPG last week, but let's say he only gets 8 rushing touchdowns, which would be for really good for almost every other quarterback. All of a sudden, he's down at quarterback 12 with Patrick Mahomes at 18 points a game. So I think it's far likelier that he doesn't get there, that he does get there this year, because I don't love the passing game. I mean, let me take that back. I don't love his elite passing game, right? But they have Saquon Barkley now, who should score a lot of touchdowns. So in my opinion, I don't think he's going to be top 12. So I think 7, 8 is easy there for me.
So for you, it's more of the changes with the offensive line, the rushing upside, that elite ceiling. Mm-hmm. Not to say he's going to have a bad year, but nowhere close to that quarterback 2 we saw last year.
That's the thing, is like, you can say, oh, out of the 12 is so bad, but that's where Patrick Mahomes was at 12. Like Anthony Richardson was at 12. Jared Goff was right there. We would all love to have those quarterbacks on our team. It's just, I don't think he has quarterback 2 in his ceiling this year.
But see, those guys that you mentioned, like Patrick Mahomes, he still is obviously, as many see, the number 1 super flex asset in Dynasty. Jared Goff, his value has really rebounded since coming over to Detroit and performing well. Both of them are a little bit more on the pocket passer side. Whereas you get guys like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, it's like if they don't get the rushing stats and they're in that range from a
Mm-hmm.
point per game perspective, the red flag is raised because people start to think, is that elite ceiling now gone? Should I transition more to a pocket passer and get a plus like with a Jared Goff or a player in that range? I feel like any dip in production from the Russian quarterbacks is more of a negative impact on their value than a pocket passer who might come down a little bit. Do you think that's fair?
I
It
think
is
that's
fair.
a perfect way to say it. Yeah.
And I think to Mitch's point of also losing Kelce as center, they still have a very good O-line, which is going to be good for Saquon and maybe overall pass protection. But that center's like a quarterback in the O-line, man, picking up blitzes and doing all those smart things. It is going to take an impact on them. And if there's a tipping point, too, their head coach, I'm not a fan of Coach Sirianni. I don't think they have a really good head coach. He's on the hot seat. That's going to be interesting to watch. But they went and signed Vic Fangio on defense, and he's a local guy here, man. He's a heck of a defensive coordinator. Their first 3 rounds of the draft were defense. Could it become a little bit of a Barkley and defensive show for the Eagles this year? We'll see.
Well, we're not going to go too far here because up next, we got DeVonta Smith. Last year, on a per game basis, he was wide receiver 23, 14.2 points per game. Mitch, does he fall outside of the top 32 receivers on a per game basis? And last year, that would have been 12.9 points per game.
That one's hard, man. I think he's so good, but it's how much do you count? I think this really boils down to if you think Saquon Barkley is going to make a meaningful difference to how they're running that offense. I don't know if it's the case anymore, so I'm actually going to go with this one like a 2. I think DeVonta Smith is still going to get his. And so he's great number 2 wide receiver. He'd be a number 1 on most teams. I mean, he's the poster boy for us not worrying about height, weight ratio anymore, speed score, whatever we want to call it. But yeah, I'm really not worried about DeVonta. But the one thing you do have to worry about him, if you guys had this last week, hey, he's going to be a top 15 guy, I would probably put that at a 1 because I just don't know if that ceiling is there. But I just think that week to week consistency, he's like the perfect guy for it.
And right now, he's wide receiver 17 according to Dynasty Daddy positional ADP, wide receiver 16 fantasy calc position value. So if he were to come out and then be a year older, obviously, because that's typically how time works, he would be, unless you're Benjamin Button, he will be 26 next year, coming off of a season outside of the top 32. Is he looked at more like, let me find somebody that age. I mean, on it, like, this is extreme, but like a Hollywood Brown type value, like not that low, but we could be talking about him at like Dynasty wide receiver 25 next year, which you get to that range, it's so interchangeable. And a lot of people might argue that where he is today is interchangeable. Ultimately, you're talking about these wide receiver 2s from a dynasty perspective, from a point per game perspective, ultimately doesn't matter that much. That's why we always like to pivot between the tiers, within the tiers, and get a plus while not really losing meaningful value or production on a per game basis. Dan, how are you here? Mitch was, what is that, 1, 2?
Yeah, 2. We'll go with 2. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mitch was lower. I'm, probably siding closer to Mitch, but I gave it a 4. Talent's there. He's clearly a top 24 talent. I think the targets are between him, AJ Brown, and Goddard. They're gonna be there because there's no one else to throw to. So all the signs are pointing good. But if that team offense does struggle a little bit, if all that volume's there, sometimes too much volume leads to injury. You do like to take some pressure off, and some teams will figure out, hey, we got to stop these 2 receivers. We're going to let them beat us with any other receiver that they have. We'll see if they have a rookie receiver that's a little bit of a sleeper. Maybe he could step up. I'm not sure. If anything ever happens to Hurts, it's Kenny Pickett throwing to him, boys. That's not good either. So there's a couple scenarios where things could go south. Less likely to happen, so I'll give it a 4.
I'm just sitting here typing to Greg. Greg asks, and how will all these rookies affect the wide receiver 2 landscape 1 year from now? And I think that's a great topic and something that I'd like to discuss in more detail. We're not going to have time right now because if we touch on that. We're going to miss most of the players here. So, Greg, I love that question. I'm going to bookmark that, though. All right, Dan. Jonathan Taylor was a name that was dropped here. Okay. He was running back 15 last year, 14.3 points per game. This year, will he be outside of the top 24 running backs? 12.9 points per game. Do we see that drop with the way that offense runs, with Anthony Richardson stealing every single touchdown, as some people like to say?
JB and Mitch, this is the only time I'm going to go back to this beginning of the conversation point by Mitchell and maybe not have a whole lot to offer with an adamant, stone cold lock of a 1. There is no way on earth he goes outside of the top 24. It is impossible as long as he stays healthy. He is a stud. He is one of the best running backs in the National Football League. There's absolutely no running backs behind him on that depth chart that are worth anything. He has all the continuity of the offensive coach and staff back. There's more talent around him on offense. Just loving me some Jonathan Taylor, man. He's almost a lock for top 5. Never mind any path to get outside the top 24.
Mitch, I want to throw a different spin when I kick this over to you. Of course, I'm not going to make it easy on you. You missed last week, so you got some extra homework here. So Jonathan Taylor right now, he's pretty consistently running back 5 for dynasty purposes, and I think that's fair. You got the big 4 from an age perspective, and then Christian McCaffrey, just that super high production ahead of him. So Jonathan Taylor, he will be 26 going into next year, right? And if he were to put up, let's say, even running back 15, running back 20 numbers, so not even outside the top 24, okay? How much does that impact his value? Like, could we be talking about an Achane ahead of him, a Walker ahead of him, if he were to come out and be running back 20, not to mention running back 24 or lower?
Is that in their own possibilities? Yes. I think the one issue is, if we talk about the Walker and ETN or an Achane or whatever, do they have that top 2 running back upside that Jonathan Taylor has? And I just think the answer to that's no. My biggest thing with this offense is I'm not worried about Taylor. I'm really not worried about a Rich, but I am worried about the pass catchers. Like, I love Pittman. Pittman is going to be fine, but I have a fair amount of AD Mitchell after rookie drafts. I could tell you by the time the season starts, I'm going to have very little of him. I just don't think
you give him away for free, because that's what you're going to have to do.
Really though, he is. If you gave me one rookie to pick who is going to definitely lose value going into next year, AD Mitchell is going to be the guy that I choose. I just don't think the passing volume is going to be there. Jonathan Taylor's a beast. Anthony Richardson is going to run for a lot. Pittman is going to take the lion's share of those targets. And unless Pittman gets injured, I want to have very few shares of the other passing receivers in an offense, right? And this is for we have someone in the Patreon who keeps sending me offer for Josh Downs. I don't want Josh Downs. No, stop. I'm good.
He's got potential. Josh Downs. I like Josh. Send me Josh Downs. I'll take him.
There you go. Send him to Dan.
Dan will offer you $17 fab and a firm handshake if he meets you in person. Okay, so fair. Not too much worry across the board with Jonathan Taylor. I know that narrative is going to be there. Well, Anthony Richardson's going to steal a lot of the work, especially around the goal line. But we will see how that plays out. Here's another wide receiver. See, the common theme here with the wide receivers, nobody came in and mentioned Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Marvin Harrison, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. I was like, I'm missing one of the big 3. But a lot of these wide receiver 2 type guys, Mitch, T. Higgins, he was and this surprised me. Mm-hmm. He was wide receiver 41 on a per game basis last year. If you would have asked me, hey, JB, just without looking it up, where was T. Higgins last year? I wouldn't have guessed 41. He was 11.5 points per game. And yeah, if you leave a game early, you get injured, it's going to have an impact. And we know T. Higgins, that pops up from time to time. Mitch, will he be outside the top 40 wide receivers on a per game basis again?
Man, like you made these numbers tough, because if you went 35, I would say probably. I could see it happening. 40 is just so low. And I mean, it's not like he played in 15 games last year and left a whole bunch of them early. He played in like 12 games last year and started 11 of them. So that's telling me that he was probably in pretty decent shape going into those games. But you know what? T. Higgins is not a guy that I have a high rostership from for that reason. Is I don't trust his ceiling game to game. DFS wise, I'll play the crap out of him in DFS, right? But I'm going to go with a 6 here. I think it's more likely than not that that does end up happening.
Dan? And really not to interrupt, but not to mention the fact he's still sitting out.
There's a chance he is so angry at them, he might not show up till week 10.
There's something there. I'm going to flip it on the opposite end here, though, with Higgins. And, I think JB's notes surprised me. Like, outside the top 40, you're waiting for, how you read things fast and you don't read it all the way. It's like, oh, T. Higgins. JB's just to say top 24. Like, oh, wait, no, top 40. So I had a double take there. JB.
But he was outside of it last year, Dan.
Yep, and you take that path. Last year, he was outside there. And I feel like just like anything that could go wrong in Cincinnati last year just went wrong in Cincinnati last year. And nobody performed to their optimal ability. And I just don't think they're going to have that bad luck again this year. Higgins is kind of that unique wide receiver, too, one of the most talented ones. And like Mitch said, DFS, even best ball, you love to have Higgins. Dynasty and redraft, it's like, okay, some weeks you love him and other weeks you're like, oh, he got me 3. But over the course of the season, I just think he is going to be motivated by money. He may not be with Cincinnati 2 years from now, but I think he'll be motivated enough to earn his payday and easily land inside the top 40. I think Joe Burrow is unbelievable. I just think everyone hopefully stays healthy this year. I give it a 2. There's a path. It wasn't a hard lock 1, but I just think more likely than not, he's too good and too motivated for his next contract to not finish in the top side of top 40 with Joe Burrow. I think last year was just an anomaly of everything going wrong.
Now, let's say he does repeat that and he's outside of the top 40 wide receivers. And, for the sake of this discussion, let's say he's back week 1. So we have a full season and he goes elsewhere next year. Yeah, there's Jamar Chase to kind of keep him from that extremely high ceiling. But are you really going to be in a better situation than that pass happy offense with Joe Burrow? I don't know. So I talked about DeVonta Smith, kind of that Hollywood-ish territory. I could absolutely see T. Higgins dropping to outside the top 30 wide receivers for Dynasty. Like if you're going to start up next year, that would not shock me. I think this one, and I hate it because I have a decent amount of T. Higgins. I still have him right above like a playoff 25 first, just because I do think he's super talented. But that risk is there. For me, this one is the most likely to hit. So I take the easy way out and don't give an answer if I think it's difficult. But for this one, 7 or 8.
He's a young 25 and going to be on somebody's favorite team next year. So he's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure.
But again, is it going to be a better situation than having Joe Burrow? I don't know.
It's kind of like a Calvin Ridley going to Tennessee and becoming number 1, except for Calvin Ridley's quite a few years older and has had a roller coaster. I think you're getting a more stable, younger in his prime receiver. Definitely have that concern, JB, if not as attractive situation. You hate to lose Joe Burrow, but give me wide receiver 1 somewhere else.
All right, Dan, I'm going to stick with you here. 2 folks mentioned this name. Josh Jacobs, coming off a pretty season in 2023. He was running back 18 with the Raiders, 13.9 points per game. Is he going to Green Bay this year? He's got the 4-year contract, but it's been talked about so much. It's kind of like 1 year, easy outs. They bring in Marshawn Lloyd via the draft. Dan, is he going to be outside the top 24 running backs? Last year, that would have been 12.9 points per game.
This is an interesting one, but I'm going to stay with some conviction here. I just think he is way too talented, even in an off year, even if the fantasy gods shine upon me and say Marshawn Lloyd is going to be everything you dreamed of, because I love Lloyd. I know A.J. Dillon still is in town. We'll see how that plays out. But I just think he's too talented. I'm giving it a 2. I think he's a guy that's driven to be very good. He's on a great team. They've invested in him for at least this year. Is there a path he gets banged up and things don't fall in place? Sure, but I just think he's too talented. Give me a 2 there with Mr. Josh Jacobs. Great situation in Green Bay.
Mitch?
Yeah, like Dan, I mean, if this wasn't points per game, I could maybe talk myself into, maybe there's an injury hiccup that happens and then he drops down. But like, if I'm kind of down on Jordan Love, then I believe in this offense. I believe in the coaching staff. So then I kind of have to believe in Josh Jacobs at that point. AJ Dillon's terrible. Like, he probably won't be on the week 1 roster. And if he is, he might not be active for game days. And Lloyd is amazing, but do we really see him coming in and fully taking over from Josh Jacobs? At best, maybe it's a 60-40 split, for Lloyd at the 40%. And if that's the case, I think Josh Jacobs is more likely a top 5 running back than running back 18, right? I just think he's in such a good situation. So for me, it's a 1.
I agree. I'm still very interested in Josh Jacobs, and I'm not necessarily on board with so many folks thinking he's going to bomb here in 2024. All right, Mitch, over to the tight end position. Trey McBride. Last year, it took him a while to get started because Zach Ertz was there, but he finished the year at tight end 8 at 15.4 points per game in 2 PPR settings. This year, the addition of Marvin Harrison, how much of an impact is that going to have? Trey McBride, is he going to finish outside of the top 12 in 2 PPR? And that would be 14 points per game.
Yes, they did add Marvin Harrison, who's going to take targets. Everyone else left. Like, there's no one left to throw to. So, like, if I could give one a negative, it would be this one. I think Trey McBride, I love Sam Laporta. I think there's probably an equal chance that Trey McBride outscores him this year. I'm talking about league winning tight end 1 upside because he's giving you such a positional advantage over every other player at the position. So for me, who's going to score more points in 2.0 premium, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Trey McBride? And I love both of them. I think Trey McBride beats him. I think Trey McBride is easily going to average 18, 19 points a game. And is Marvin Harrison going to get there as a rookie? Maybe, but probably not. So for me, this is like a negative 40.
Wow, hey, and don't disrespect Zay Jones like that.
My bad. Yeah, with the 3 games that he plays this year, I think he'll be, on the field.
And everybody's favorite breakout that Dan and I were with a wet blanket last week, Michael Wilson. Does he take a jump forward? Well, we talked about that last week. We're not going to dig into it more. Dan, are you at a negative 40 with Mitch, or where do you stand?
That's like I think ratings history here by Mitch there, taking us to negative temperatures and degrees, whatnot. But no, I'm not negative, but I definitely love his conviction, and he's very bullish on McBride, sort of like I've been bullish on Ferguson, pushing him in top 12 this year. But McBride, I'd give it like a 2 just because like the Kyler Murray factor, and maybe something gets wonky and he goes to 13 on just an off year because something's off in Arizona, but it's unlikely. You give something a 2, it means I really don't think it's going to happen. He's a top 3, top 5 tight end, I think, locked in there. There were games last year where he just looked like a beast. And there were a couple games, Mitch, I think we might have wished we had a little bit more out of him, but there's some factors in Arizona, but they finally got themselves an alpha wide receiver, which they needed so bad. Takes a little pressure off Michael Wilson. We'll see if he can continue to develop. Zay gives him a little bit of depth. Greg Dortch is hanging around, but nobody that's going to steal targets. So, give it a 2. I'm all in on the ride with McBride.
All right. Well, the ride with McBride, maybe he only goes as far as this gentleman takes him. Dan, Kyler Murray, quarterback 13 last year at 19.5 points per game. Obviously didn't play the full season. This year, is there a chance he finishes outside the top 24? And that would have been 15.9 points per game and +6, -4 scoring. So about a 3.5 point dip compared to last year's performance.
This is a fun one. I think if you ask me any other year, we've had some fun Dynasty Theory episodes where we've been back and forth on Kyler Murray and certain quarterbacks. And I've always been hard on Kyler Murray. Never really been a fan. Kind of had him in that Justin Fields class of, hey, we're just way too hyped on this guy. But this is a year where I'm a little more up on Kyler Murray. I've said that in recent episodes. And if I'm a little up on him, I don't see how I could go backwards with him and say he's not going to, crack the top 24 because he's always kind of been there. I think he's going to have a good fantasy football season for owners that have stuck with him, and their loyalty will pay off. So I give it a 4. I mean, he is still Kyler Murray. He's not the best thrower in the world. We're relying on those legs to keep going a little bit. I'll give it a 4 there. I think he's in for a good season and will stay far away from top 24.
Mitch?
He came in after that ACL injury and still averaged 30 rushing yards a game. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to count him out. They're playing in a dome. And honestly, that stuff matters to me late in the year too, where are these teams going to be in blizzard, windy conditions in November, December, or do they get to play in Arizona and Los Angeles most of the time? So, I mean, this one's, I hate to do it again, but it's like a maybe 2 for me. Maybe that offense just flat out fail. But I don't see Kyler Murray failing that bad because his rushing, that's why we like these rushing guys, because that upside is just there. The floor is there.
We all know that like Dak Prescott over the last 3 years has been green in my sheets. Kyler Murray is not far behind from a quarterback I'm looking to acquire. I think it is far more likely he's a top 6 quarterback in points per game this year than hell, even outside the top 18. So I'm not at a negative 40 just because that's pretty low, but I'm going to give this a 1. I'm very excited to see what this Arizona offense can do. And, I think it goes through Kyler Murray. So
and you were really high on Kyler while he was out with the ACL. I remember you getting a whole bunch of shares of him at that point. I wish I would have done the same thing now, but I didn't. You have them all. That's how it goes.
Still not enough. My rostership is fairly low. I'll go over to our partner, dynastydaddy.com, after the show and look at my rostership. One of the many capabilities that Jeremy has going on over there. Great free resource. All right. Mitch, this name was brought up twice. Nico Collins. He was wide receiver 15 last year at 16.1 points per game. Can he fall out of the top 30 at 13 points per game this year?
This is the most likely for me. I'm going to give it an 8. And not because Nico's bad or anything, but they are adding Diggs. They have that's a pretty dominant pass catcher to bring in. When you're Nico Collins, do I ever feel like he's an elite talent like what Diggs has been in the past? No. He played at elite level last year, but I don't know if he was just that pure talent that's dominating targets. I think he more dominated targets because Tank Dell didn't play a whole lot, got injured, broke his leg. And I know Nico Collins, was he injured at that time too, John? Is that why you're waving?
No, I'm throwing the white handkerchief here because the splits with and without Tank Dell, it really wasn't that big of a difference.
That's fine. Tank Dell is also not Diggs. There's something when you have a very good wide receiver come in. How are those rest of the pass catchers going to do when they weren't elite talents in the first place? So I just think it's more likely that Diggs gets more of the pie than these guys continuing what they do and Diggs getting like 10, 11 targets a game. Or not target, sorry, target rate a game. I just don't really see it happening.
So, Dan, is this likely for you that he falls out of the top 30? And as a result, then, Stephon Diggs, it's a 1-year deal. And even if he would go elsewhere, people are going to remember that whenever the offseason rolls around and people are in startups and we see some offseason trades.
Yeah, this is a good one. I'd say I would lean Mitch's way compared to the others. This is one of them that's more likely than not. 8's a little rich. So maybe I won't say as likely, but I give it a 6. But I could see it. I mean, he was on the cusp last year. You add Stephon Diggs, and we're all assuming that everything's just going to go right in Houston again. Like this is like awesome team that everyone's on the train and they're Super Bowl ready now, and like, yeah, it came together and they snuck up on some teams last year. I know they had Diggs, but there's no guarantees here. As high as I am on them, believe me, I love it. I'll give this a 6. I just think we're asking a lot for him to be just rise again and do more. I think what this does is this hopefully keeps Noah Brown off the field completely, which is a great thing for fantasy. But you do have Diggs. Dell hopefully stays healthy an entire year. I think we had a good question in our chat of kind of who does Diggs hurt here. I think Schultz is another guy that's very inconsistent. But they're still going to play that tight end matchup sometimes when they have it. I think it's just a matter of what Diggs do we get that really will impact Collins. How much left is in his gas tank. So give me a 6 on this. I still love Nico. I think he's consistent. I think he's solid. But now you got to feed Stephon Diggs as well, and hopefully Tank Dell for an entire year.
I'm of the belief that Nico Collins is the least impacted by Stephon Diggs' arrival out of the entire wide receiver core. We'll see how that plays out. Another gentleman I have in green on the sheets, just by a few spots. Nothing.
Now I know who to trade him to. That's awesome.
Right? I will trade for Nico Collins at market value. I will.
Okay. I'll find my market value, and then that will be the market value. I think that's fair.
You're like, he's been trading at wide receiver 1 prices. What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
I'm gonna make my own.
JB, what do you give it? What do you grade this, JB? What's your number? I think this is important here. So Mitch is an 8. I'm at 6.
I don't think it's impossible because again, we don't know how this is going to play out, right? And just with the arrival of Diggs, I'll go with 3. I'm certainly.
Okay, so I was waiting for.
Yeah, I don't think it's like I would not fight you guys on this one too much. Who scores here, Mitch? Who scores more points this year?
Tank Dell.
What?
Tank Dell.
Now, on a per game basis, DeVonta Smith, T. Higgins, Nico Collins. Rank those 3.
Smith, Higgins, Collins.
Easy.
Yeah, that's
for you too.
No hesitation.
Yeah. E2, Dan. E2. What are we doing here, guys?
Dan brought up a good point, though. Like, I love CJ Stroud. I think he's amazing, but we are asking so much of this offense just to continue what happened last year that we're just assuming that they're still going to go out and have 400 passing yards a game and they're going to be blowing the doors off everybody. What if they have some offensive line injuries? Then all of a sudden CJ Stroud can't do CJ Stroud things. I think we're really high on all those guys, but it's okay to temper expectations just a little bit.
And I can see Joe Mixon could catch too, and probably score touchdowns. I think that they might have a little more success in the running game there.
There is still room for this offense to grow. CJ Stroud, his touchdown rate last year was 4.6. That's fine, but there were only 23 passing touchdowns last year. Like
they just added an alpha, John.
And you think that pie is going to still remain? That pie is going to be bigger.
Yeah, but isn't it going to take away from Nico? Like, how could you be as bullish on Nico adding an alpha? Plus, you get Tank Dell for a whole season. He left last year. So
is this the same alpha we saw for half of the season in Buffalo last year? He couldn't catch a cold, Dan.
He was a head case. He was mad. He was in his own head last year.
Oh, and now he's been talking to somebody. Now he's happy. What happens the first game Nico Collins and Tank Dell out target him? He's going to storm off the field like a little baby again.
He'll be good for a year.
He doesn't have to play in Buffalo. Now he gets to play in Houston in December. I think that's pretty good. I mean, not having to be in those conditions, it's not bad.
Later in life, JB, you like the finer things. You like nicer climates. That's where Diggs is at right now.
You're saying Pittsburgh doesn't have a nice climate?
Yes.
But yeah, like I think that pie is going to get bigger. Yes, Nico Collins' slice of that pie, the portion might not be the same percentage he had this year, but that pie is going to be bigger. There is still room for this offense to grow. Okay. That is all I am saying.
Through Joe Mixon and now supporting 3 receivers instead of
it's growing with Joe Mixon.
Through Joe Mixon, the guy the Bengals were ready to cut.
It was time.
It was time.
That relationship got stale like Diggs in Buffalo. It was time for change.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. All right. Well, hopefully things aren't changing for this gentleman because I have him everywhere. Mitch, Travis Kelce, tight end 2 last year, 20.8 points per game in 2 PPR. Is there any chance he falls outside of the top 12 and that would be 14 points per game? Or is this a situation where as long as Travis Kelce is active, he's getting those points?
Well, it would be fun to be like, it's a 7 because he has things off the field and he's so, off doing that he's not going to be working on football, right? But until that guy actually retires, and I don't know when he's going to do it because the Chiefs just gave him like a 2-year contract extension with a lot of money tied to it. So I think he plans on playing out the rest of that deal. For me, it's a 2. But the problem is, it's not because I don't think he could drop down. I think he's more likely to be 8 than he is 2 this year. But the tight end landscape is terrible. Like, I don't want any of those tight ends around 12, 13, 14, 15. I don't want those guys. So am I willing to pay for the hope that Travis Kelce can continue what he does or be slightly less? I will do that far more than here. Let me pull up the Dalton Schultz, Goddard, Waller, Hunter Henry. I don't want those types, right? So let me have Travis Kelce, even if it is for 1.5 more years.
Yeah, and it's a situation where he doesn't necessarily need to drop outside of the top 12. Again, it may be a little extreme, but like you said, that tight end 8 threshold, if he's not a top 3 or 4 tight end on a per game basis, his value is already dropping every single year due to his age. It doesn't matter how he performs. So especially at this point in the offseason, when nobody wants veterans, if he were to go out and be tight end 8 next year on a per game basis, 1 year from today, he's going for a second, maybe. So he doesn't even need to drop that low from a per game perspective. If we just see any type of decline, there's going to be a negative impact.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because he's 34, going to be 35. And we know we put him in that category of a wide receiver playing tight end category. That's what he is. But he's still playing at a high level with the greatest quarterback on earth. They're going to pitch count him a little bit and use him a little bit more wisely. So, it makes it easy to put a couple other guys ahead of him, 1-2 at the tight end landscape in Dynasty 3-4. The Laportas, the Bowers, the Kincaids, the McBrides. Yep, we're going to take those guys first. But from a production standpoint, to Mitch's point, I just think there's still so much production that you don't want to get down near that 11, 12, 13, and he won't go down that far. So I give us like a 3, and that's only because, hey, there's a chance your legs could fall off when you're going to turn 35 later this season. At some point, it's going to get there, but I think he knows his body. I watched Jason Witten, those kind of other, Ertz is still playing, those older Hall of Fame type tight ends that just still know how to get open. And if you can still get open with Patrick Mahomes and find the red zone, when his legs fall off, I think he'll know it's coming and he'll retire before he sticks us in fantasy with something worse than top 12.
And I see the comment in the chat. He's certainly one of the very few guys that, because of the production, especially in 2 PPR for tight ends versus his trade market, he's dying on my teams. Like, unless I think I moved him for 109 in one league earlier this offseason, and that was kind of just to diversify a little bit. And that price is certainly still fine. Like, I would cash out some shares still at that price. But what most people are willing to pay, he's staying on my rosters until he decides to call it quits. All right, Dan. Devon Achane. This was mentioned multiple times. Okay. Last year, especially because of that huge spike game, he was running back 5 on a per game basis, 17.8 points per game. Initially, and I'm throwing a curveball at you guys. Initially, I had outside the top 30 running backs at like 11.7 points per game. But even let's go to outside the top 24 at 12.9 points per game. If we see that 5-point drop, that's going to negatively impact his value, especially because there's a lot of people that are out on him to begin with because of the efficiency, his size, injury concerns. So, Dan, where are you? Devon Achane outside the top 24 running backs, which would be 12.9 points per game last year.
If you're going top 24, I would probably, he's going to be in this mix, but I would push my 6 score to an 8. I think there's a path, definitely a potential path where he could fall outside the top 24. Now, again, do I think it's going to happen? But if you're asking us, hey, give a grade of there's a scenario where he could bust and fall out there, I think he's the most likely on this list today where it could happen. But this is a unique situation in Miami. I mean, they've got, we talked about, I think, Mostert last week, where, he's another one of those. He's kind of like Achane. They all got something that, you're attracted to, but you'd rather get rid of something, move them for something more stable and consistent that you have. But if we're going by today, I mean, Mostert looks healthy and in for, their first and second down carries and a lot of volume and red zone. Achane still looks, explosive and is going to have those pop-off games where he's going to have some big points. They draft Jalen Wright, which, in one league where someone sniped me recently of Lloyd, I had to take Wright. So now I'm banking on him and hoping he sneaks in there with Achane a little bit and gets some big plays. So I don't know, man. I give it an 8 outside the top 24, but you could easily throw that challenge flag and say, hey, he's going to stay healthy. He's going to be an explosive playmaker and score. Those big games will carry him to better production. I could see that.
Mitch?
Yeah, I hate to hedge. This one's a 5 for me. It's like, I hate his value in Dynasty, right? I mean, he has that value because we saw him play, gosh, how many games was it? It wasn't even that much last year. He played in 11 games, started 4, somehow had 100 rushing attempts and 800 rushing yards with 8 touchdowns. It's like, yeah, he did it on the field.
That's what that Denver Broncos defense could do for somebody.
That's true. And I mean, I loved him coming out of Texas A&M. I have a lot of Devon Achane shares. So like, his value was great from that perspective. Do I think he should be ranked as highly as he is? I'm saying no, because I don't think he's going to be able to continue that amazing efficiency that he showed last year. But that offense is so good that I will never count really anybody out in that offense. And so I kind of have to hedge there. Like, it's probably as likely he's top 10 again as he is, running back 30. So that's going to be my one hedge today, is he's a 5.
You could pick apart like this. Once you get to running back 6 in Dynasty, you really could pick apart all of these guys. We could talk about injury. We could talk about the changing landscape, whether it's the free agents moving, incoming rookies, players getting traded, whatever the case may be. And we just talked about Joe Mixon a few minutes ago that, he's a Bengal. They're going to cut him. He gets traded to the Texans. Like, things change so quickly. And like, it's just, you could pick apart so many. Kyron Williams, you could make a case against him. Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, Rashad White. Like, you could build a solid case from a narrative perspective to knock any of these guys. But who has that ceiling? Not many.
Yep.
Christian McCaffrey, like that Breece Hall, Gibbs. Like, we're talking about, I mean, have we even seen that ceiling from Bijan?
Not yet. We will this year. I have hope. But yeah.
Like, I love Bijan's still my top tier of running back, so it's not anti-Bijan. But like, there is that gap. Like, once you get into running back 6, it's hard to ever really want to pay more than a late first. And that's just the nature of the beast and the dynasty landscape and the game we play. So that's my way of saying I don't freaking know, but
sure, I guess maybe
like what I'm willing to pay for any of these guys, it's not going to kill me if I'm wrong, but that ceiling is just too extraordinarily high. And ultimately, it might be a case where he pops off like crazy 240-point games. And just because of that, he's a top 12 running back for a per game perspective. So you know what? I'll go 3. I don't think he goes outside the top 24 running backs on a per game basis. But like Mitch said earlier, if we were looking at season long, yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit more likely.
You muted yourself because you touched your mic.
Dan,
touch these mics. They're very sensitive.
Rookie mic mistake. But I think they really need him to be a top scorer too. Miami's another one of those teams that's really interesting to me this year. Is they lose Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator, and they bring in a coordinator from Anthony Weaver from Baltimore, who's hasn't been a defensive coordinator yet. He comes from a good scheme, but he's got to step up. I think this offense may have to put up a lot more points if the defense isn't as good. We'll see. Beckham's is still a big, huge if as a third receiver. They draft Malik Washington. I think he could potentially either dip into or pass Beckham on the depth chart. I'm not sure. Jonnu Smith's their tight end. Does he steal something? Is that kind of like speed tight end that does some gadget things? It's going to be really interesting to watch, but they need Achane to really step up.
All right, Dan. We're going over to Zamir White, and this is a funny one because last year he was running back 74 on a per game basis, 3.8 points per game in PPR. This year, Dan, will Zamir White be outside of the top 40 running backs, 9.7 points per game, or is volume going to be enough to certainly get him over 10 points per game? But ultimately, that's not a difference maker anyway. But where are you?
He should not be outside the top 40. But again, if we're asking, hey, give our listeners what's the odds or chances he could be and disappoint, so you're not maybe investing too much in him, I'm going to give this a 5. I'm going to give this a 5 because there is a path where, I watched him at Georgia. He's good. He's solid. He's not great. All right. They drafted him in the 4th round, the Raiders. You still, even though also not impressive, they do sign Alexander Madison behind him, who's got some starting experience, who could, sneak into that. This is a Raiders team that we've got a lot of questions on. It's probably a Gardner Minshew led, unless O'Connell could somehow outplay him in the preseason. But it's probably Minshew led, and a head coach is very unproven. They had lots of play for getting out of the McDaniels shadow, but this is another team where there's no guarantees year 2 is going to go smooth and easy for the Raiders. It could be a very long year for this team, and they could just struggle. So I'm going to give it a 5. I'll go glass half full. He should get a lot of volume. He is a decent back. They block decent in the run game. You still have Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers to take some pressure off the run game. And Minshew's decent. He's decent.
You have Jacoby Myers too, and that is disrespect to Jacoby. Yeah, he's a good wide receiver.
Apologies to my boy Jacoby. I got a couple shares there. He does get open. He's a very good wide receiver. So they've got some weapons. It's just a lot of ifs. So I say it's a 5. There's a path where he may just miss it if Madison sneaks in and this team struggles. But the 5 also gives you hope to say, hey, he should finish. I'd say probably more likely than not, in the 20s there somewhere.
Mitch, I'm gonna again curveball here. Even if he were to put up like top 28 numbers, let's say, like with the kind of hype around him from, hey, he's really the only guy in town. Yes, they have Alexander Madison, who is pretty much free if you had doubts about Zamir White this year. But even if he were to be a mid to late running back 3, who cares?
Yeah, to me, so we see this guy once every couple of years. We've had Damian Williams was one previously. Dameon Pierce was one last year. Kenyon Drake has been one before, to where we like these backs who we've never really believed in the talent, but we're like, oh, they're going to get all the rushing attempts, so we should buy into that. I believe these guys fail far more often than they compete, but the point you brought up was perfect, John, is even if you don't have him on your roster, is he going to kill you? Is he the guy who's going to come out and all of a sudden be a top 8 back in the league for 10 to 12 weeks this season? Maybe we see a game or two, sure, but I think it's far more likely that this Raiders offense is extremely bad and they're more in the play for the number 1 overall pick than they are in play for the 15th overall pick, right? I can easily buy into this. I will buy into him on some underdog best ball teams, but I won't have that many shares in Dynasty because that floor can drop out. And let's say, what's his price right now? Probably a mid to early second, I would guess. Mm-hmm. I mean, if he fails, you're not getting a late 3rd for him. And even if he improves, he's probably worth the 111 to 112. So you're never going to gain that much value. Dameon Pierce had his amazing rookie year, right? Came and you had a show with the FF Dynasty guys saying, hey, is he worth the first? Is he worth the first? He was at that point, but 3 months later, he wasn't. And that could easily be the case with Zamir White.
And Zamir White for Dynasty on Dynasty Daddy positional ADP, he's running back 24. Fantasy Calc, he's running back 28. So people do believe in him enough from where we were looking at him a year ago, where his value was nowhere close to that. Like, you know, I look at the guys that he is going over. Give me Aaron Jones for one season, then Zamir White. He's going ahead of Najee Harris. Give me Harris. He's right there with David Montgomery. That's a no-brainer for me. Give me David Montgomery, even splitting work with Jahmyr Gibbs in that Detroit offense. So I do think there's some opportunities. Of course, Zamir White, he's one of those divisive guys that people either they kind of invested in him already or they just have no interest. So I don't know that we see so many Zamir White trades, but there are probably some opportunities out there still. All right, Dan, to wrap up the show, this is a guy that was named twice, Puka Nacua. A tremendous rookie season, historical. Wide receiver 7 last year, 17.8 points per game. Is there any chance, and again, I had to drop low because so many wide receivers clustered together, 14.2 points per game was wide receiver 24 last year. Is there any chance he slips outside the top 24 receivers for 2024?
Slim to none. You know, way too talented. Great, you know, great situation. Him and Cooper Kupp are 1A, 1B, whatever way you want to, you know, pitch it. The other receivers in their offense are literally nothing more than niche role players. You know, the Demarcus Robinsons, Tutu Atwells, Higbee, whoever. So he's a stone cold lock to me. I gave it a 2. The only reason I didn't give it a 1 is, you know, maybe Cooper Kupp just, you know, comes back, has one out for a year, something struggles with the Rams. And, you know, we know there's some talented receivers in the landscape, but slim to none, man. I think Puka's the real deal.
I'm going with the 1 because, I mean, they play Detroit week 1. Last year, during the playoffs, Puka had 9 receptions for 180 yards. By all means, that should have been 250. So just week 1 alone this upcoming season, he could probably put up 250 on the Lions, and he's just going to be that much more ahead points per game wise after that. So, but no, in reality, he's extremely good. Like Dan brought up, outside of Cooper Kupp, there is nothing on that depth chart. You could like DeMarcus Robinson, but I think you only like DeMarcus Robinson because of what Stafford can do with wide receivers, right? Yeah. As long as Stafford is healthy, Puka Nacua is going to be a top 5 wide receiver.
Final thoughts.
Dan, for the 246th time, talking about some potential fantasy football busts that our Dynasty Theory patrons threw at us this week. A lot of good conversations. What do you got for our listeners' final thoughts?
Yeah, listeners, man, I hope you get a lot from today. I think if you take our last 2 episodes, it's really a great breakdown of, you know, you get 3 different perspectives plus our chat of how we feel about these players. Hopefully you could turn some of that into some trade opportunity. For example, you know, like JB mentioned, Zamir White, you know, odds are he could have a decent season and still not be the guy next year, you know, like a Pierce situation as Mitch alluded to. So I'm going to go out now and see where I got Zamir White and see if I could trade up and get a running back who's probably going to be a starter for a couple more seasons. Or
Dan, you cannot bump the microphone.
I did it again. Dang.
It is very
sensitive.
See that? For the listeners, I got a new mic and the mute button's right there when you tap it. So I got to work on that. I'm Italian. I talk with my hands, you know?
I do too,
you
but
and
like,
John
you got to
Bull.
learn. I've knocked things over. You hear things in the background like, boom, boom, boom. Yes, I mean, I get it. All right, Mitch, on this fine Memorial Day weekend, what do you got? Final thoughts?
You know, I'm usually out here saying, hey, this isn't a great time for startup drafts for whatever reason. This is the best time because outside of like a player getting arrested, there just isn't a lot to happen as far as guys getting injured on the field during OTAs. This is their off time. So if you want to get into a startup draft, this is the perfect time through like almost August 1st to where the veterans start reporting for training camp that you have this good 9-10 week range to where you could get a couple startups in and you don't have to worry about Josh. I was going to say, gosh, John, I remember when we were doing the Andrew Luck startup draft. I think you took him And then like it was, I don't think it was days later. It might have been a day later he retired. And that's
14 team super flex. I pulled the trigger at like 107.
Mhm.
And I was like, you have to be kidding me. But yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Happy to help. Happy to help. But yeah, that's all I got. Just join a startup.
Join
And
the startup.
if you want to join a startup, get in the Discord. It's free because there's startups happening. I mean, it's almost daily at this point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people looking for startups, so we could kind of play matchmaker, if
What
you
we
will.
do.
Hopefully you all enjoyed this week's episode. We always appreciate everybody that tunes in and spends the morning with us here on Sundays. For Mitch Sorensen, Dan Lamagna, I'm John Bauer. Have a great week.